The day my grandmother died, my family smiled while they destroyed my future. They sat in a lawyer's office, listened to her will, and calmly erased me from existence. No inheritance, no property, no family share, nothing. For years, I believed them when they said Grandma had changed her mind before she died. Then, one rainy afternoon, a stranger handed me a box containing a single envelope. Inside was a secret my family had buried for nearly 8 years, and by the time I was done uncovering the truth, they lost everything they stole from me. Before we get into today's story, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that sometimes justice takes years to arrive, but when it does, it hits harder than anyone expects. Now let's get into it. I was 26 years old when I learned my family had spent nearly a decade celebrating my absence. That realization hurt more than discovering they stole my inheritance. Because money is money, property is property. But realizing the people who raised you never actually loved you the way you loved them, that leaves a scar in a place nobody can see. To understand what happened, you need to know about my grandmother. Her name was Eleanor, and she was the only person in my family who ever treated me like I mattered. My father, Richard, had always been distant, not abusive, not violent, just cold. Like every conversation was an obligation. My mother was worse. She cared deeply about appearances. Everything in her life revolved around image. The perfect neighborhood, the perfect church attendance, the perfect family photos, the perfect daughter. Unfortunately, I wasn't that daughter. My older sister Melissa was. Melissa was beautiful, confident, popular. The kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the center of attention. Meanwhile, I was quiet, bookish, awkward, the kid who preferred reading in the corner during family gatherings. Growing up, I became accustomed to hearing comparisons. Why can't you be more outgoing like Melissa? Melissa never causes problems. Look how successful your sister is. No matter what I accomplished, it never seemed enough. I graduated near the top of my class. Melissa barely passed. My parents praised Melissa's social skills. I earned scholarships. Melissa accumulated debt. My parents admired her ambition. It didn't matter. The rules were different for us. And I knew it. The only person who seemed to notice was Grandma Eleanor. She'd sit beside me during holidays while everyone else gathered around Melissa. "You know something?" she'd whisper. "What?" "They're blind." I'd laugh. "Grandma." "No, I'm serious." She'd squeeze my hand. "One day they'll realize what they had right in front of them." At the time, I wanted to believe her. Now I know she was right. Just not in the way either of us expected. When I was 17, my parents divorced. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no scandal. Just years of resentment finally collapsing. My father moved across town. Melissa stayed with Mom. I moved in with Grandma. Officially, it was because her health was declining. Unofficially, because she knew I needed somewhere I belonged. Living with her changed my life. For the first time, I felt wanted, valued, safe. We spent evenings cooking together, watching old movies, talking about everything. She told me stories about our family history, about her late husband, about the investments she'd built over decades. She wasn't wealthy in a flashy way. She drove the same car for 15 years, lived in the same house for 40. But she was smart with money. Very smart. One evening, while we drank tea on the porch, she said something I didn't fully understand at the time. "People become strange when money is involved." I laughed. "What brought that on?" She stared into the darkness. "Promise me something." "Okay. If anything ever happens to me, don't blindly trust what people tell you." Something in her tone made me pause. "What do you mean?" She looked at me. really looked at me. Then she smiled. Just promise? So I did. I promised. And years later, that promise would save me. After college, I moved to Chicago for work. Grandma cried when I left. I cried too, but we spoke constantly, almost every day. Then, 3 years later, I got the phone call, the one everyone dreads. Grandma had suffered a stroke. By the time I arrived at the hospital, she was unconscious. Machines beeped softly around her. The room smelled sterile, artificial, wrong. I remember holding her hand, feeling how cold it was, trying desperately not to cry. My family was there too. My father, my mother, Melissa, everyone acting devastated. At the time, I believed them. 3 days later, Grandma passed away, and everything changed. The funeral felt strange. Looking back, I understand why. My family wasn't grieving. They were waiting. Waiting for something. Waiting for paperwork. Waiting for money. Waiting for the future they'd already imagined spending. A week later, the lawyer called. The family gathered for the reading of the will. I drove there feeling numb, still grieving, still processing. The lawyer looked uncomfortable from the moment we sat down. I didn't recognize the significance then. I do now. He opened the folder, cleared his throat, and began reading. Most of the estate was divided between my father and Melissa. The house, investment accounts, savings, assets, everything. My name appeared exactly once. A small personal item. Grandma's silver necklace. Nothing else. I remember blinking, certain I'd misunderstood. Surely there had been a mistake. I had lived with her, taken care of her, spent years helping her. Yet somehow I received virtually nothing. When the reading ended, my mother gave me a sympathetic look. The fake kind. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I know this must be difficult." Difficult. That word still makes me angry. I looked at the lawyer. Did Grandma change the will recently? A strange silence filled the room. Then my father answered, "Yes." Too quickly. She updated everything before she died. The lawyer didn't speak, didn't confirm, didn't deny. Just stared at his papers. Something felt wrong. But grief has a way of clouding instinct, and I was drowning in grief. So I accepted it. At least publicly. Privately, the doubts remained. For months, I replayed conversations in my head. Moments with Grandma. Plans we'd discussed. Things she'd said. None of it matched what happened. Still, what was I supposed to do? Challenge the will? Accuse my family of fraud? Based on a feeling? So I tried moving on. The problem was, my family didn't. Within months, Melissa was driving a luxury SUV. My father renovated his house. My mother suddenly took expensive vacations. And whenever I visited, there was this unspoken attitude, a smugness, like they'd won something, like my exclusion had validated what they'd always believed, that I mattered less. Then the comments started, little digs disguised as concern. "You know Grandma loved all of us. I'm sure she had her reasons. You shouldn't dwell on the past." Each comment felt like salt rubbed into a wound. Eventually, I stopped attending family gatherings. Nobody seemed upset by my absence. In fact, they appeared relieved. Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Holidays disappeared. Phone calls became rare, then non-existent. By 34, I barely spoke to any of them. I built my own life, my own career, my own circle. I convinced myself I'd healed, that I'd accepted what happened. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door, and everything I thought I knew started falling apart. Because standing outside was an elderly man holding a cardboard box. And the first thing he said was, "You don't know me, but your grandmother wanted you to have this." Inside that box was a secret powerful enough to destroy my entire family, and I had absolutely no idea what was waiting for me. The man standing outside my apartment looked to be in his late 70s. Gray coat, weathered face, kind eyes. The kind of person who seemed immediately trustworthy. But I wasn't exactly in the habit of accepting mysterious boxes from strangers, especially strangers claiming to know my dead grandmother. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Who are you?" He shifted the box in his arms. "My name is Harold." The name meant nothing to me. Seeing my confusion, he nodded. "That's understandable." Rain drummed softly against the hallway window. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "I managed your grandmother's investment properties." I froze, because I knew she owned properties. Not many, but a few. And she'd talked about them often. Too often for me to forget. Harold noticed the change in my expression. "You remember?" I nodded slowly. "Some of them." He sighed. "Good." Then he handed me the box. "Open it." The cardboard felt surprisingly heavy. I carried it to my kitchen table. Harold remained standing nearby, silent, watching. Inside the box were folders, old documents, letters, property records, and an envelope with my name written in my grandmother's handwriting. The moment I saw it, my chest tightened. Because I recognized those looping letters instantly. There was no mistaking them. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before her death. And after reading the first paragraph, I felt the room spin. Because the letter began with 7 words. "If you're reading this, they lied." And suddenly, nothing felt real anymore. I read that first sentence 3 times, maybe 4. The words seemed impossible, like my brain couldn't process them. "If you're reading this, they lied." My grandmother had never been dramatic, never exaggerated. She was the most practical person I'd ever known. If she wrote those words, she had a reason. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm, too quiet. I looked up at Harold. "What is this?" His face darkened. "The truth." I looked back down at the letter. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. I have made arrangements for you to receive this letter only if Harold loses contact with me for an extended period of time. I pray I'm simply being paranoid. But if I am not, then you need to know that a large portion of my estate belongs to you. Not your father, not your sister. You." My vision blurred. I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe, because those words confirmed what I had secretly suspected for years, the suspicion I'd buried, the doubt I'd convinced myself was grief. Grandma hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't changed her mind. She hadn't abandoned me. Someone had taken what was mine. I continued reading. "Several months ago, Richard pressured me to revise my estate plans. He believes Melissa deserves more support than you because she has made poor financial choices." I refused. After that conversation, he became angry in a way I had never seen before. I have also learned that Melissa has been asking questions about my accounts and property holdings. If anything happens and you are somehow excluded from my estate, do not accept that outcome without investigation. Harold knows where the documents are. Trust him. I love you. Always. Grandma. I stared at the final line, the ink, the signature, the familiar way she curved the final letter in her name. My throat tightened. For years I'd carried this quiet wound, the belief that maybe she hadn't loved me as much as I'd thought. Maybe I'd misunderstood our relationship. Maybe everyone else had been right. And now that lie was exploding in front of me. I looked up at Harold. "What documents?" He sat down heavily. like a man carrying a burden for too long. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. There was another will. The room went silent, not metaphorically, actually silent. Even the rain seemed distant. I felt cold. Another will? He nodded. One I witnessed personally. Every muscle in my body locked. Explain. Harold took a deep breath. 3 months before Eleanor died, she updated her estate plan. I swallowed hard. And? And according to that version, you inherited the majority of her investment portfolio. I couldn't speak. He continued. The house was to be sold. The proceeds divided. But you were the primary beneficiary. My hands clenched. So what happened? Harold looked away. For the first time, he seemed uncomfortable. Gordon happened. Gordon? The attorney. The lawyer. The same lawyer who read the will. The same lawyer who sat silently when my father claimed Grandma changed everything. My stomach dropped. Harold leaned forward. I trusted him. His voice sounded bitter. I shouldn't have. I felt adrenaline spreading through my body, the slow burn of outrage. What are you saying? Harold slid a folder across the table. Look. Inside were copies of documents, property schedules, investment summaries, estate records, and attached to them, a notarized estate distribution draft. My name was everywhere. Everywhere. I felt physically sick. For years I'd been told I deserved nothing, that Grandma had made her choice. Meanwhile, these papers suggested the exact opposite. The entire foundation of my family's story was cracking. Then Harold said something worse. That's not all. He opened another folder, this one thicker, more organized. Inside were financial records, property transfers, corporate filings, account movements, years of them. I stared at the paperwork, confused, until Harold pointed at a date, 3 months after Grandma's death. Look closely. I did. Then my jaw dropped. One property, a small commercial building, sold. The proceeds transferred into a holding company, owned by Melissa. Another property, transferred below market value, purchased through an entity controlled by my father. Another, and another, and another. The pattern was obvious. The estate wasn't simply inherited. It had been dismantled, stripped, harvested, like vultures picking apart a carcass. A wave of nausea rolled through me. For years, I'd imagined them receiving a legitimate inheritance. Instead, they'd treated Grandma's legacy like a feeding frenzy. Harold watched my reaction. They've been liquidating assets for years. How long have you known? His expression tightened. Not long enough. I didn't like that answer. He noticed and sighed. I suspected. There it was. The truth. He'd suspected, but hadn't acted. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly because my anger had found larger targets. Much larger targets. I spent the next 4 hours reviewing documents. Every page deepened the betrayal. Every signature felt like a knife. Every transaction raised new questions, questions that demanded answers. But one question mattered most. If another will existed, where was it? That answer arrived shortly after midnight, and it nearly stopped my heart. Over the next several weeks, my life became consumed by investigation. Work suffered, sleep disappeared, my social life evaporated. Every free moment went into understanding what happened. I felt obsessed, because I was. Imagine learning that nearly a decade of pain might have been built on a lie. Imagine discovering your family may have stolen not only money, but your entire understanding of reality. How could I think about anything else? I hired an estate attorney, then a forensic accountant. Both expensive, both skeptical. At first, until they saw the documents. Then their attitudes changed dramatically. One afternoon, my attorney leaned back in his chair, expression serious. Olivia. What? He tapped a stack of papers. If these records are authentic, I held my breath. This could be massive. Massive. The word echoed through my head. I wasn't thinking about money. Not yet. I was thinking about vindication, proof, justice. My attorney continued. The biggest issue is locating the original will. Without it, things become harder. Harder. Not impossible, but harder. I hated that word. Because it meant uncertainty, and uncertainty became my constant companion. Weeks turned into months. Investigation followed investigation, dead ends, missing files, destroyed records, uncooperative witnesses. Every time we got close to something important, another obstacle appeared. And during all of it, my family remained completely unaware, at least initially. Then came the first crack. The first sign that someone knew I was digging. It happened on a Thursday night. I was leaving work when my phone rang, an unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it. For some reason, I answered. Hello? Silence. Then a familiar voice. My father. I hadn't heard him in almost 3 years. The sound instantly made my chest tighten. Olivia. Cold. Formal. No greeting. No warmth. Just my name. What do you want? A pause. Then, I heard you've been asking questions. There it was. The first confirmation. Word had reached them. I walked toward my car. Heart racing. What kind of questions? Another pause. I think you know. His voice had changed. Less confident than I remembered. That alone interested me, because guilty people often sound different when they realize secrets are resurfacing. I unlocked my car. What exactly are you worried about? The silence that followed was almost comical. Then he laughed. A forced laugh. A nervous laugh. The kind people use when they're frightened. And suddenly, I knew. I knew. He was scared. For the first time in nearly 10 years, he was scared. That realization felt incredible. But it also made me careful. Because scared people are dangerous. Very dangerous. I don't know what you've been told, he said, but you're wasting your time. I smiled. He couldn't see it, but I smiled. Maybe. Your grandmother made her choices. There was that phrase again. The family script. The lie they'd repeated for years. Only now it sounded weaker. Much weaker. I leaned against my car. You seem very concerned about someone wasting their time. He didn't answer. And that silence told me more than words ever could. The call ended shortly afterward. But the message was clear. They knew. And if they knew, then they were watching. Which meant I was getting closer. Closer than they'd expected. Closer than they were comfortable with. Closer to something they desperately wanted buried. That night I barely slept. Not because I was afraid. Because I was excited. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt momentum. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was fighting back. Trying to stay buried. And buried things only fight when you're close enough to uncover them. 3 days later, my attorney called. His voice sounded different. Urgent. Focused. Almost shocked. Olivia. What happened? We found Gordon's former assistant. My pulse spiked. The lawyer who read the will. The lawyer who conveniently stayed silent. The lawyer who retired 6 months after Grandma died. I sat upright. What did she say? A long pause. Then, you're going to want to sit down? I already was. But suddenly, it didn't feel stable enough. Because according to Gordon's former assistant, a week before the will reading, someone brought an entirely different document into the office, and the person carrying it wasn't my grandmother. It was my father. And for the first time, we had a witness willing to testify. The wall protecting my family was finally beginning to crack. And behind that crack, Something much uglier was waiting to be exposed. I didn't sleep the night my attorney told me about Gordon's former assistant. I tried. I really did. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while rain tapped against the windows and shadows moved across the room. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandmother's handwriting. I saw that sentence. If you're reading this, they lied. For almost 8 years, I'd carried the weight of being unwanted. 8 years of believing the person who loved me most had somehow decided I wasn't worth remembering. 8 years of swallowing that pain, living with it, building a life around it. And now? Now I knew the truth. The truth was worse, much worse, because being forgotten hurts. Being deliberately erased is something else entirely. I got up around 3 in the morning and walked into my kitchen. The apartment was dark, silent. The city lights reflected faintly through the windows. I poured myself coffee even though I knew it would make sleeping impossible. At that point, sleep wasn't happening anyway. My mind kept replaying one question. Not whether they stole from me. I already believed they had. The question was, how far had they gone to do it? The answer arrived faster than I expected, and it made my blood run cold. 2 days later, I sat in my attorney's conference room. My attorney, David, looked unusually serious. Beside him sat the forensic accountant. Stacks of documents covered the table. Folders, records, copies, financial reports, property transfers, everything we'd collected over the previous months. David folded his hands. We've reached a point where I need to explain exactly what we think happened. I nodded. My stomach felt tight. Okay. He took a deep breath. First, we believe your grandmother's final will was replaced. The words landed like concrete. Not suspected. Not possibly. Not maybe. Replaced. A deliberate act. A crime. The accountant slid several documents toward me. Look at the signatures. I leaned forward. At first glance, they looked identical. Then he pointed out inconsistencies. Tiny differences. Pen pressure. Stroke direction. Letter spacing. Things I never would have noticed. But once he showed me, I couldn't unsee them. The signatures weren't the same. Not exactly. One looked natural, the other looked practiced. Copied. Imitated. Forged. I felt sick. David continued. We consulted a handwriting expert. My chest tightened. And? He believes there's a strong probability the signature on the final will isn't authentic. I stared at him. For several seconds I couldn't speak. My grandmother's signature. Forged. The room suddenly felt hotter. Smaller. Like the walls were pressing inward. I swallowed. What happens if that's proven? David's expression hardened. The entire estate distribution could be challenged. The words echoed through my mind. Entire estate distribution. Not part of it. All of it. Everything. Every property. Every account. Every transfer. Everything they'd built their lives around, gone. For the first time since this investigation started, I felt something powerful. Not anger. Not grief. Hope. Real hope. And hope is dangerous. Because once you feel it, you start imagining possibilities. You start imagining justice. You start imagining consequences. And consequences were exactly what my family deserved. Over the next several months, the investigation accelerated. One witness became 2. 2 became 4. 4 became 7. Each person added another piece to the puzzle, another crack in the lie, another thread connecting the fraud. A former bank employee remembered unusual account activity shortly after Grandma's death. A retired property manager recalled conversations between my father and Gordon. An assistant remembered being instructed to destroy old estate drafts. Piece by piece, the picture emerged. And it was uglier than I'd imagined. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was coordinated, planned, intentional. For years, every discovery made me angrier, but it also taught me patience because I realized something important. If I rushed, I might recover some money. If I waited, I could recover everything. And there was a huge difference between those outcomes. So I stayed quiet, very quiet. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make threats. I didn't post cryptic messages online. I didn't tell mutual relatives. I let them believe they were safe. That was the hardest part. Knowing what I knew and saying nothing. Because every family photo I saw online made me furious. Every vacation, every luxury purchase, every smiling holiday picture. I knew where some of that money came from. I knew whose legacy had paid for it. My grandmother's. The woman who spent decades building something meaningful. The woman who trusted them. The woman they betrayed. Sometimes I'd stare at those photos and imagine calling them, just to hear the panic in their voices. Just to tell them I knew, but I never did. Because panic fades, evidence lasts, and I wanted evidence. About 6 months into the investigation, I received the most important phone call of my life. David called at 9:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because of what happened next. His voice sounded different, controlled, but excited. "Olivia, what happened?" "We found it." I stood up immediately. My chair nearly tipped over. "What?" "We found the original." My entire body froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The original what? Even as I asked, I already knew. "The will." I sat back down. Hard. The room spun. After months of searching, months of dead ends, months of uncertainty, they found it. The real will. The document everything depended on. The document my family thought had disappeared forever. The document my grandmother actually signed. I covered my mouth. Tears filled my eyes before I realized they were coming. Not because of the money, because of validation. Because finally, someone could no longer tell me I imagined it. No one could say I misunderstood her. No one could rewrite history. The truth existed. In black ink. On real paper. Waiting. David explained how they found it. A retired records custodian had stored archived estate materials from Gordon's office after his retirement. Most of the files were considered irrelevant, forgotten, buried in storage, but among them was a sealed backup package. And inside that package, the original will, the real one, the one naming me as primary beneficiary. I cried after hanging up. Not dramatically, not loudly, just sat alone in my apartment and cried. 8 years. 8 years of believing I wasn't enough. 8 years of carrying shame that never belonged to me. 8 years stolen. And now the truth had surfaced. I wish I could tell you those tears were sad. They weren't. They felt like poison leaving my body. 3 weeks later, we filed. Officially, legally, publicly. The challenge hit my family like a bomb. And that's when things became interesting. Because guilty people behave predictably. The moment they're cornered, they reveal themselves. Melissa called first. I hadn't heard from her in almost 5 years. Her number appeared on my phone while I sat in traffic. I stared at the screen, then answered. "Hello?" Silence, then. "Are you serious?" No greeting, no apology, nothing. Straight to outrage. Classic Melissa. I smiled. "Nice to hear from you, too. You filed a lawsuit?" I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised even me, because for years I would have been intimidated. Years ago I would have defended myself, explained myself, apologized. Not anymore. "You seem upset." Her breathing sharpened. "You can't do this." That sentence told me everything. Not you shouldn't. Not you're mistaken. Not you're wrong. You can't. The language of entitlement. The language of panic. I leaned back in my seat. Looks like I already did. She exploded. For nearly 10 minutes she ranted, accused, threatened, manipulated. According to Melissa, I was selfish, vindictive, greedy, cruel, unstable, obsessed. Every accusation bounced harmlessly off me, because beneath all of them I heard the real emotion. Fear. Pure fear. The fear of someone who suddenly realizes the bill is coming due. Eventually she snapped. Do you have any idea what this could cost us? There it was. The sentence. The accidental truth. Not what it could cost me, not what it could cost the family, what it could cost them. I smiled. Probably less than it cost Grandma. She hung up. I sat in traffic grinning. For the first time in years. A genuine grin. Because the balance of power had shifted. And everyone knew it. Then came my father. His reaction was different. More calculated, more dangerous. He requested a meeting, a private one, no lawyers, no witnesses, just us. David immediately advised against it, which naturally made me curious. So I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant halfway between our cities. The moment I saw him, I noticed something. He looked older, much older. Stress does that. Guilt does too. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes tired. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. You're making a mistake. I almost laughed. The confidence, the arrogance. Even now. Even after everything. I stirred my coffee. Interesting opening. His jaw tightened. This will destroy the family. I looked directly at him. What family? The question landed like a slap. Good. I wanted it to. Because for 8 years they'd treated me like a stranger. Now suddenly family mattered? Convenient. Very convenient. He looked away first. Not me. Him. That tiny moment felt enormous. Then he tried a different approach. Your grandmother loved all of us. I stared at him, waiting. He continued. She wouldn't want this. I nearly laughed again. Because that was the problem. He still didn't understand. He still thought this was about money. It wasn't. Not really. Money mattered. Justice mattered more. The truth mattered most. I leaned forward and asked the question I'd wanted answered for years. Did you forge it? The color drained from his face. Not all at once. Slowly. Visibly. A reaction so obvious it practically answered the question. For 3 seconds he said nothing. Then, no. Too fast. Too sharp. Too rehearsed. A liar's answer. I sat back, and in that moment, I knew. Maybe not legally, not yet, but emotionally, instinctively, I knew. He'd done it, or helped do it, or known about it. Maybe all three. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As I walked away, he called after me. Olivia. I turned. His face looked strangely desperate. Think carefully about what you're doing. I held his gaze, then replied, I finally am. And left. By the end of the year, the lawsuit had grown into something far larger than anyone expected. Fraud claims, estate challenges, asset tracing, property recovery, witness testimony, forensic reviews. The deeper investigators dug, the worse things became for my family. And then came the discovery that changed everything. Because investigators uncovered evidence suggesting that certain properties had been intentionally concealed during estate proceedings, which meant this wasn't merely inheritance fraud, it was potentially criminal. The moment that report landed on David's desk, he called me, and his first words were, Olivia, they're in serious trouble now. I looked out my apartment window. Snow was falling outside. Soft, quiet, beautiful. For years, I'd dreamed about justice, wondered what it would feel like. Now I knew. Justice doesn't arrive like lightning. It arrives like an avalanche. Slow at first, almost invisible, then suddenly impossible to stop. And my family's avalanche had finally begun. They just didn't realize how much destruction was still coming. The funny thing about lies is that most people imagine they collapse all at once. A dramatic confession, a shocking revelation, one giant moment where everything falls apart. Real life doesn't work that way. Most lies die slowly, painfully, piece by piece, like a building being dismantled brick by brick. And that's exactly what happened to my family. The first cracks appeared during discovery. What should have been a routine legal process became a disaster for them almost immediately. Because once investigators started demanding records, timelines, communications, and financial documentation, the stories stopped matching. My father's version of events didn't match Melissa's. Melissa's version didn't match Gordon's. Gordon's version didn't match the paperwork. And paperwork is very difficult to argue with, especially paperwork that existed years before anyone realized a lawsuit was coming. I remember sitting in David's office reviewing evidence when he looked up and shook his head. "What?" He laughed, not because anything was funny, because he was genuinely amazed. "I've been practicing law for 23 years. And I've never seen people leave this many trails." The accountant sitting beside him nodded. "They got comfortable." That was exactly it. They got comfortable. 8 years without consequences. 8 years without questions. 8 years believing they'd won. Eventually, people stop hiding when they think they've escaped. They become careless, and carelessness leaves evidence. Lots of it. Emails, transfers, property records, meeting notes, bank statements, conversations, tiny pieces that seemed harmless individually. Together, devastating. One afternoon, we uncovered emails between my father and Gordon discussing estate documents days before Grandma's death. Another batch revealed conversations about transferring assets quickly after probate concluded. Then came messages involving Melissa. And those messages were even worse, because they revealed knowledge, prior knowledge. The kind of knowledge someone shouldn't possess unless they already knew what was coming. Every new discovery strengthened our case. Every new discovery weakened theirs. And with every passing month, the pressure increased. The pressure changed them. You could see it. Even from a distance. The first person to crack was Melissa. I learned about it through one of the deposition transcripts. If you've never read deposition transcripts before, they're fascinating, especially when guilty people realize they're trapped. For hours, they're forced to answer questions. Simple questions, direct questions, questions supported by documents they haven't seen yet. At first, they act confident, then defensive, then angry, then afraid. Melissa followed the pattern perfectly. The transcript started normally. Then inconsistencies appeared. Then contradictions. Then panic. Eventually, she became visibly frustrated. At one point, she reportedly slammed her hand against the table. The court reporter even noted the interruption. I remember reading that line and smiling, because for the first time in her life, charm wasn't working. Popularity wasn't working. Manipulation wasn't working. Reality was standing in front of her demanding answers, and reality doesn't care how charismatic you are. A week later, she attempted to settle, not publicly, privately, through attorneys. The offer arrived on a Tuesday morning. David called. "They want to talk." I stared out my office window. "No." A pause. "You don't even want to hear the number?" I didn't. Not really, because by then this wasn't about the money, not entirely. The money mattered. The principle mattered more. They had 8 years to talk. David chuckled softly. "I figured you'd say that." The offer disappeared. The case continued. And the pressure kept building. Then came Gordon, the lawyer, the man who'd sat silently while my life was rewritten. The man who'd watched me leave that office believing I meant nothing to my grandmother. The man who could have spoken, could have stopped it, could have done the right thing, but didn't. His deposition lasted nearly 11 hours. 11 hours. By the end, according to everyone present, he looked exhausted, broken, defeated. Because unlike my father and Melissa, Gordon understood exactly how serious the evidence was. He understood legal exposure, professional liability, potential criminal implications, and most importantly, he understood that the truth was surfacing. 1 month later, Gordon agreed to cooperate. When David called me with the news, I nearly dropped my phone. "What do you mean, cooperate?" "He wants immunity considerations." I sat down immediately, because that only meant one thing. He was ready to talk. Really talk. And when Gordon finally did, the entire case exploded. The confession wasn't dramatic. No tears, no emotional breakdown, just facts. Cold, precise, damning facts. According to Gordon, my father approached him shortly before Grandma's death. There were conversations, pressure, promises, requests. Then documents appeared. Documents Gordon claimed he knew were questionable. Documents he processed anyway. Documents he should never have accepted. As I listened to David summarize the statement, I felt strangely calm. I expected rage. Instead, I felt clarity. The last piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. For years, I'd wondered, questioned myself, doubted my memories. Now there was no doubt left. My father helped steal my inheritance. Knowingly, deliberately, and he convinced my sister to participate. The confirmation hurt, but uncertainty had hurt more. Truth is painful. Yet somehow it's easier to carry than confusion. The court proceedings became public shortly afterward. And that's when the social consequences began. Those consequences were fascinating. Because money can buy many things, it cannot buy reputation back once people learn how you earned it. Friends disappeared. Business relationships cooled. Neighbors started talking. Extended relatives suddenly became difficult to reach. People who once praised my father became remarkably quiet. Nobody likes being associated with fraud, especially inheritance fraud, especially when it involves an elderly woman, especially when it involves family. I heard stories, little stories, the kind that spread through communities, people whispering at church, people discussing the case at restaurants, people forwarding articles, people asking questions. My father spent years protecting his image. Watching it crumble must have been torture. Part of me felt satisfaction, another part felt sadness. Not for him, for Grandma, because she would have hated seeing her family become this. Then I remembered something important. She didn't create this. They did. They made their choices. The consequences belonged to them. The ruling arrived almost 9 years after Grandma's death. 9 years. When people imagine revenge stories, they often picture quick victories. Real justice is slower, much slower, sometimes painfully slow. But when it arrives, it's thorough. The courtroom felt strangely quiet that morning. I remember every detail: the polished wood, the faint hum of air conditioning, the rustle of paper, the tension, the anticipation. I sat beside David. Across the room sat my father and Melissa. Neither looked at me. Not once. The judge reviewed findings, evidence, expert testimony, estate records, financial tracing, legal conclusions. Each statement felt heavier than the last. Then came the decision. The forged will was invalid. The original will was recognized. Estate distributions were reversed. Assets became subject to recovery. Additional damages were awarded. I heard the words. But they almost didn't feel real. Years of work, years of uncertainty, years of anger, condensed into a few minutes. The judge continued speaking. Yet I barely heard anything else. because one thought kept repeating in my mind. Grandma was telling the truth. That's what hit me hardest. Not the money, not the victory, not the consequences. That. Grandma was telling the truth. The woman who loved me never abandoned me, never forgot me, never changed her mind. For nearly a decade, that truth had been buried. Now it finally stood in daylight, where it belonged. The aftermath was brutal. Properties were sold, assets recovered, accounts examined, transfers reversed, investments redistributed. The financial damage to my father and Melissa was enormous, life-changing. The lifestyle they'd built began collapsing almost immediately. The luxury SUV disappeared, vacation properties were sold, accounts shrank, businesses faced scrutiny. Everything changed. And the most ironic part? The very fortune they'd stolen ended up funding the legal process that exposed them. I couldn't help appreciating that. Poetic justice has a certain elegance. Several months after the ruling, I received a letter. Not from a lawyer, not from a court, from Melissa. The first genuine communication she'd sent in years. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. The letter was 4 pages long. Most of it was excuses, justifications, blame. She claimed Dad manipulated her, claimed she didn't understand everything, claimed events got out of control. Maybe some of that was true, maybe not. One paragraph stood out. Only one. I never thought you'd actually fight back. I read that sentence several times, because I think it revealed everything. Not greed, not entitlement, not arrogance, expectation. She genuinely believed I wouldn't fight, that I'd stay quiet, accept my place, carry the burden, just like always. The same assumption my entire family made, the assumption that I was too passive, too quiet, too accommodating, too weak. Turns out they were wrong. I never responded to the letter. There wasn't much left to say. A year after everything ended, I visited Grandma's grave. It was early morning. The cemetery was empty. Birds chirped softly in nearby trees. The air smelled like fresh grass. I brought flowers, the same kind she used to grow beside her porch. I stood there for a long time, longer than I expected, thinking, remembering, healing. Eventually, I sat down on the grass and spoke out loud. It probably looked strange. I didn't care. "You're not going to believe this," I said. Then I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. Because for the first time in years, the weight was gone. The doubt, the shame, the anger. Gone. Not completely. Maybe those things never disappear entirely, but they no longer controlled me. I looked at her headstone and remembered a conversation we'd had years before, one I hadn't thought about in a long time. We'd been sitting on her porch watching the sunset, and she'd said, "One day they'll realize what they had right in front of them." Back then, I thought she meant love, acceptance, family. Now I understood. She meant strength. The strength they spent years overlooking. The strength they mistook for weakness. The strength that eventually brought them down. I smiled. Turns out you were right. The wind rustled through nearby trees. Soft, gentle, peaceful. And for the first time since she died, I felt like I'd finally come home. People often ask whether revenge made me happy. The answer is complicated. Taking back what was stolen didn't erase the pain. It didn't restore lost years. It didn't magically heal every wound. But it did something important. It restored the truth. And sometimes, the truth is worth more than money. What my family stole wasn't just an inheritance. They stole trust, identity, belonging, history. They tried to rewrite my story. In the end, that's why I fought. Not to become rich, not to punish them, but to make sure reality survived. Because once people convince the world you don't matter, Proving that you do becomes the most important battle of all. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the people who wronged you. It's refusing to remain the version of yourself they created. If you enjoyed this story and believe that justice, even delayed justice, is still worth fighting for, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, if your own family stole your inheritance and erased you from the will, would you have fought back or walked away? Until next time, remember, some people think silence means weakness. Sometimes it's just patience. And patience can be the most dangerous thing of all.